Okay, let's dive into a forgotten chapter of history where a devastating war was fought not just with cannons and soldiers, but with ink and accusations. We're going to look at this really bitter exchange of letters between two presidents, right in the middle of one of South America's deadliest conflicts. To really set the stage, let's start with this number, 40,000. That is a staggering figure. It's the number of Paraguayan soldiers who had already died, from battle, from disease, before the main allied armies of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay had even stepped foot in Paraguay. The war was really just getting started, and the losses were already catastrophic. So, you can imagine the desperation. It's 1865, and Paraguay's president, Francisco Solano López, decides to launch a completely different kind of offensive. He's not sending in more troops. He's sending words, aimed directly at the heart of the enemy command.
But to really get why this letter was such a big deal, you have to understand the sheer desperation behind it. I mean, the situation for López's army was already beyond dire.
Just look at these numbers. López's army was basically wiped out before the main invasion even kicked off. 30,000 men gone, lost to diseases like dysentery and smallpox. Another 21,000 were lost in this disastrous early campaign in Corrientes. So what's he left with? A tiny core of just 14,000 healthy soldiers, worn out, battered, but somehow still fiercely loyal. His army was effectively gone. So with his back completely against the wall, on November 20th, 1865, López sends this explosive message, and he sends it to his direct counterpart, Argentine President Bartolomé Mitre, who also happened to be the commander-in-chief of all the Allied forces. In this letter, López tries to seize the moral high ground. He accuses the Allies of waging a totally barbaric war, and he argues that he, on the other hand, is following the rules of civilized nations. He's basically trying to frame this as a fight between his honorable conduct and their savagery. And López lays it all out, a whole laundry list of horrific alleged war crimes. He claims the Allies murdered wounded prisoners, sold others into slavery, and even sent an assassin after him. But the real bombshell, the central accusation, is that Paraguayan prisoners were given this impossible choice: commit treason or die. Well, President Mitre did not waste any time in responding, and his reply was every bit as scathing, if not more so. This was quickly turning into a true war of words. Mitre's response is basically, nope, not a single word of that is true. He just dismisses every single one of López's claims, saying they're either outright lies or just completely twisted stories, based on faulty intel, maybe from what he called passionate and supposed reports. And this is where it gets really interesting. Mitre directly tackles that most serious charge. So López says, "You're forcing my men to become traitors?" Mitre fires right back, claiming that any Paraguayans in his army chose to be there. They joined, in his words, by their own will, just like other exiles who were already fighting against López. And then, he just turns the tables completely. Mitre accuses López of the exact same kind of barbarism he's complaining about, and he brings up things that were widely and publicly known. He specifically calls out the kidnapping of civilian women and children who were ripped from their homes and imprisoned in Paraguay on López's direct orders. Okay, so we have two leaders, each accusing the other of these unspeakable atrocities, each claiming to be the good guy. So who do you believe? As they were exchanging these letters about civilized war, what was actually happening on the ground? This one fact says it all, doesn't it? It just reveals the staggering hypocrisy at play. Just 3 days before sending his high-minded letter about civilized conduct, López himself ordered all Allied civilians in Paraguay to be arrested and thrown in shackles, and the source material is chillingly clear. Nearly all of them would later be tortured or executed. López's paranoia, you see, was creating this reign of terror within his own camp. Get this. Bizarre and tragic story. A sergeant in the Presidential Guard is executed before dawn. His so-called crime? Allegedly conspiring against López. And the evidence? A totally harmless chat with a foreign officer about trivial things like whether Queen Victoria always wore her crown. López's men forced the officer to write down the entire conversation. But it was too late. The sergeant was shot without a trial. And yet, despite all that internal terror, his soldiers on the battlefield were pulling off some absolutely insane feats. In one raid, just 400 Paraguayan soldiers attacked an allied force of almost 8,000 men. They fought for 4 hours, inflicted nearly 1,000 casualties, and then successfully got away. It was a stunning victory and a huge embarrassment for the Allies.
So you can see how this whole civilized warfare thing was pretty much a fantasy. Both leaders claimed to be champions of it, but their letters were really just a smokescreen. The reality was a conflict where atrocities were everywhere, and mercy was in very short supply.
The cruelty was just widespread. A young girl was publicly given 60 lashes just for trying to go home. 2 Allied deserters were whipped until they confessed to being sent to intentionally spread smallpox, and then they were whipped to death anyway. López's paranoia knew no limits. He even had his own top general and other senior officers executed after a secret trial.
Which brings us all the way back to our final question. When both sides are committing these horrific acts, what's the point of these accusations of barbarism? Is it a genuine, even if it's hypocritical, plea for a little humanity? Is it just a cynical propaganda tool, something to put in the history books? Or is it something darker, a kind of psychological projection where a leader ends up condemning in others the very barbarism he himself has mastered?